Strangers on a hill. Morgan found himself alone on a Friday night in the capital. All he had was his school bag on his back, filled with everything he cherished. He wanted to be where it was all happening. He thought the answer was Edinburgh's Princes Street. His assumption from watching past Hogmanay parties on New Year's Eve sadly led him to believe it was the place to be on the weekend. He most likely believed this to be true because he wanted it so badly to be the case. Morgan was at that tender age of 16, and all he wanted was a place to go where he would be accepted for who he was. So you can only imagine the sadness in his eyes when he turned up to Princess Street, and now it was happening. As he mourned his life choices, he stood at the top of Princess Gardens, looking up at the famous castle and admired its colorful lights flashing around the dark sky. He began to think about how he could make a name for himself. What if he climbed up the castle's volcanic rock walls and streamed it live on Instagram? His schoolmates back in Dunfermline would say he was mental, which would be a good thing, of course. Every school kid in Scotland wants to be known as unpredictable, which would completely change his current pitiful reputation. Morgan's daydreams were suddenly interrupted by female screams. "This is my moment," he thought to himself. If someone was being attacked or raped, he could be the one to save her. Then we'll see who's laughing. But as quick as his imagination flew into fairy tale scenarios, the females' cries soon turned to those of laughter. He peered down the hill into the gardens, where he saw a man playfully chasing a woman. His heart sank. He continued to gaze down at the Princess Gardens when he noticed how little light there was. What if, instead of being the hero, he could be the victim? If anything happened to him tonight, then his parents would have guilty consciences. The image of them blaming themselves made Morgan smile, and the Facebook comments from all those judgy folk who had nothing better to do than comment on something that didn't concern them. Before he could dwell on it any further, Morgan had already made his way down to Princess Street Gardens. He wanted to put his earphones in, but he remembered that he had purposely switched his phone off for a reason. It wasn't long before he began to regret going down there. He had this bad feeling stirring in his stomach. He crossed paths with the same couple from earlier. They were sitting on a park bench together, and she continued to squeal like she was in trouble before laughing like she was having the time of her life. The man gave him a stern look as Morgan continued to walk past them. A person was further ahead on the path wearing a dark hoodie as they walked towards Edinburgh Waverley Station. As Morgan edged closer towards them, the more that person continued to look over their shoulder in a paranoid manner. By the time Morgan had walked all the way to the other end of the park, they had somehow disappeared. Once he was back up on Princess Street, he realized that he actually quite liked how he could hide in the dark shadows within the gardens. It made him feel mysterious, as if nobody knew what he was potentially capable of. He kept walking. As he passed a couple holding hands, it only reminded Morgan that he was a VL, virgin lips, and hadn't managed to kiss a girl yet. His plan was to keep walking, and only he would know when to stop. As he headed east on Princess Street, he was walking by a tall, black, stained wall when he heard voices coming from above him. He stopped to look up, only to find a boy slightly younger than him walking along the steep wall. After questioning whether the boy was going to fall to a potential death, Morgan began to wonder why the random wall was even there. That's when he noticed an opening in the wall. As he walked through it, he immediately froze when he came across the old towering gravestones. Cemeteries weren't his thing. Before he left, he had noticed all the ancient mausoleums and how few of them had locked gates. For a short moment, he considered hiding out inside one. It could be somewhere quiet and dry for him to go in order to get a good night's sleep. Morgan swiftly went back to walking when he noticed that same person from Princess Gardens, the one wearing the dark hoodie. He began to wonder what they were up to. But within seconds, they had conveniently disappeared into a side street. Morgan rushed ahead to find out where it would lead. As he entered the alleyway, he came across a tall flight of stairs. This was exactly the sort of adventure that Morgan had been looking for. As he walked up the 143 steps to the top, he was certain that someone wouldn't have gone out of their way to build these steps unless it led to something worthwhile. He soon found himself on top of Carlton Hill, an iconic spot in Edinburgh. He immediately recognized the Greek-looking monument that stood in the middle of the hill. He turned around and admired the breathtaking views of Edinburgh when, suddenly, he tripped over. And without knowing what exactly happened, he instantaneously found himself staring up at the night sky as he lay on the ground. A familiar-looking figure then intimidatingly appeared high above him, the hoodie wearer. To Morgan's surprise, the guy was actually a female. "Stop following me, you creep!" she shouted aggressively. "I'll kick your head in if you don't." Morgan was completely dumbfounded. He didn't think his day was going to get any worse, but here he was, about to get leathered by this crazy, pretty-looking girl who also appeared younger than him. "Did my parents pay you to follow me around?" she asked, a little calmer. Morgan didn't know what to say. He obviously wanted to tell her the truth, but he was also afraid that she would not believe him and would still choose to kick his teeth out. After a moment of silence, the girl finally stepped back, allowing him to get up from the ground. She could see fear in his eyes. "I just wanted to see what was up the stairs," Morgan said, offended. "You've never been up Carlton Hill before?" "I didn't even know it had a name." "You don't sound like you're from Edinburgh." "It's only my second time here," Morgan said, insulted, as he brushed himself off. She had a baffled look on her face as she searched around Carlton Hill. "Did you come to Edinburgh on your own?" Morgan exhaled. He felt like he was now being made fun of. "Who else would I go with?" Maybe your parents?" she said condescendingly. "My parents are too busy running the family business. It's called Creepy McCreeps. Other parents pay us to follow their daughters around at night." She smiled at Morgan. "Great name for a business." "I'm Kira, by the way." Morgan. "Follow me then, Morgan," she told him. She didn't even wait for a response before heading towards the National Monument of Scotland, the unfinished Greek-looking thing. The 200-year-old, 40-foot-high columns made it look like it should have been built in Athens. Kira was the first to climb up its 6-foot-high brick base. Once she was on top, she reached down and took Morgan's hand before she pulled him up beside her. They both stood there, taking in the extended views of Edinburgh. They could now see the River Forth and the land over on its other side, known as the Kingdom of Fife, where Morgan came from. And if they both looked closely enough into the far distance, they could also see the flashing lights of the Queensferry Crossing Bridge. Kira was 15 and grew up in Edinburgh, only a mile away from Carlton Hill. Her parents were completely committed to their jobs. In fact, both their careers held ties to the Scottish government. Her father's law practice was inundated with cases that were directly associated with Scottish independence, mainly their disputes with the UK government. Her mother worked directly for the Scottish Parliament as a committee member. Her job required having strong opinions on all public matters around the country. Due to her parents' dedication to their jobs, Kira judgingly watched them both become pawns of society. And so, Kira saw herself as being a rebel with a free spirit. She saw firsthand how her parents had placed their careers above everything else, including Kira and her brother. They also fully expected Kira to follow them into politics, so they constantly forced her to attend these after-school clubs where the sole objective was to mold her into a future politician. Kira's escape was roaming the streets of Edinburgh at night, looking for life's answers. Her parents knew that she regularly snuck out at night, but they chose not to concede or respond to their daughter's antics. They knew fine well that she did it for the attention and that Kira wanted them to react. It was the family sitter who had gone behind Kira's back to grass her up to the parents, even though the sitter was mainly there to look after Kira's 9-year-old brother. Kira and the young sitter never saw eye to eye, so tonight was no different. They both had gotten into an argument, while neither refused to stand down from their principles. On the spur of the moment, the sitter revealed to Kira that her parents knew all about her jaunts at night and that they wouldn't be guilt-tripped into giving her what she wanted. Kira's character was incensed by this revelation. She believed that she had the upper hand this entire time. All Kira wanted was a normal family that came with a typical upbringing. The reality was that Kira spent more time with the family sitter than with her parents. Her parents didn't even bother to tell Kira and her brother where they were going the majority of the time, probably to save their kids the shame of knowing everything else had priority over them. For all Kira knew, her parents could have been spending all their time partaking in couples' sex parties. Kira knew all her parents cared about was Scottish independence, and they would both sell their souls to the devil if it meant Scotland becoming its own sovereign state. Her parents were forever telling Kira that her actions had consequences that could harm the entire family's reputation. Kira just wanted a happy medium. She didn't want to ruin what her parents had worked hard for, but at the same time, she would have liked to give them a good scare in the process. Kira explained her situation to Morgan as they sat on top of the substandard replica of the Parthenon Temple. The hill was fairly quiet except for the few tourists who wanted to get a quick bird's-eye photo of the city before they returned home. Once Kira was finished telling her life story, Morgan went silent. He was either shy or reluctant to share his own predicament. "So Morgan, what's your story then?" Kira forcefully asked. "What's brought you here tonight?" Well, Morgan paused as he stared at the ground below. "I have this secret that nobody knows about besides my dad." "That's nice. I'm jealous that you can talk to your dad about private things." Morgan raised his head up to the night sky before exhaling. He said he's going to tell everyone my secret unless I put all this nonsense, as he put it, to an end. His eyes began to blink as they fought back against the tears. "Wait, what?" "My dad's old school. I knew fine well if he found out, he'd go apeshit." "So why would you tell him then?" Morgan exhaled again as he continued to stare up at the night sky. "He caught me today while I was skipping school." "Oh, so you're a bad boy, Morgan, who doesn't follow the rules," she said jokingly. "Tomorrow night was supposed to be my first show," Morgan said as he began to get upset, "and now I can't go through with it, or he'll kill me." "Oh my God," Kira said out loud as she stared at Morgan. Morgan looked up at Kira with his teary eyes. "That you're a drag queen. How did you?" "Your big eyes and your long lashes, Morgan, they're gorgeous. It was the first thing I noticed when I saw you. I actually said in my head that you would make an amazing drag queen." Morgan smiled proudly as he wiped the tears from his eyes before the realization came surging back. "Well, Megan Freeman will never get to see the light of day." Kira smiled. "I love the name. We can't let our parents tell us what we should and should not be. We have to stand up for ourselves, or we'll forever be pawns to the world." Morgan stared up at the moon with his big, watery eyes. The conversation went quiet. "How did your dad discover Megan Freeman?" "I was in the living room in full drag, rehearsing my routine, when my dad walked in on me. He grabbed me by the throat and just started calling me every gay slur under the sun. Then he began slapping me around my face. He said he wanted to punch me, but he doesn't hit girls." Morgan remained quiet as he stared off into the city lights. "Are you gay?" "I usually have pretty good gay vibes." "I know it's hard to believe since everyone links being gay to drag queens," he enthusiastically explained, "but I'm not. I just love dressing up and being someone else." "So why did you even bother running away from home?" she asked him before pausing. "No offense, but do you really think your dad actually cares?" Morgan shrugged his shoulders. "Let's do something about it," she exclaimed. Morgan started smiling at her. "I think I like you, Kira." Morgan suddenly stopped smiling when he noticed Kira's blank face. He squeezed his teeth together while he tried to fight his face from blushing with embarrassment, but it didn't work. Kira also fought back against her own shyness before she managed to send Morgan a smile, but he was too busy avoiding eye contact to notice. Morgan then felt something on his thigh. He slowly looked down to find Kira's hand resting there. When he turned to face her, he found Kira gazing into his eyes, so he gazed back. Kira was the one who made the first move as she leaned in. Morgan immediately closed his eyes as he waited for their lips to touch. As soon as they did, Morgan felt instant relief knowing he finally had his first kiss, even though nobody in school would believe him. It would just be like saying he had his first kiss with someone on holiday. It was like when Americans told their friends at school they had a Canadian girlfriend/boyfriend when questioned about their lack of interaction with the opposite sex. That old chestnut. As soon as the kiss was over, they awkwardly stared off into the distance. They were both embarrassed to ask about the kiss since it was also Kira's first. After a moment's silence, Morgan was the one to break the ice. So, what's the plan? How are we going to teach our parents a lesson? Kira gave him another smile. I thought you would never ask. Morgan found himself again alone in Edinburgh's new town, where homes are no cheaper than £1,000,000. He spent a moment admiring the architecture while he imagined how the rich lived. When he first made the rash decision to leave home earlier that day, he thought the world was against him. On the other hand, Megan Freeman, his drag queen persona, was bubbly and always up for a laugh, as opposed to Morgan the pessimist. Morgan knew if he found the right setting, he could make the transformation and wow people. And just like that, he'd have a new social circle that could offer meaning to his sad little life. Earlier that night, when he fantasized about scaling the walls of Edinburgh Castle, he did so as Megan Freeman. Not only would it have made him a household name within the drag scene, but it would have sent a powerful message to his disapproving father. Morgan was the definition of a daydreamer and was always on the lookout for that happy ending. This was most likely obtained from his infatuation with movies. He had only just watched the movie Hallam Foe, a film about a loner who decides to move to Edinburgh for an exciting life after a fallout with his dad. Ironic, or a coincidence? And like the movie, Morgan fully expected something good in return when things got bad, similar to karma. When one door closes, another should always open. Morgan slowly made his way back to the center of Edinburgh as Friday turned into Saturday. All he could think about was Kira as he walked past the queue of drunk people waiting outside a nightclub. He wondered if he would ever see her again. Morgan wouldn't find out until later how Kira's Strangers on a Hill plan, inspired by the Alfred Hitchcock classic, had heedlessly backfired on her. Kira was the one who persuaded Morgan to agree to her proposition, the perfect crime completed by two complete strangers. Her intentions weren't quite as dark as the motives from the 1951 movie. She had only wanted to teach both their fathers a harsh lesson as opposed to cold, calculated murder. Morgan wasn't stupid or love-struck, he knew he needed an alibi to eliminate him from what Kira had planned for his father. She never revealed what she had in mind other than it was the right thing to do. All she asked for was his house key and if she could be Megan Freeman when she carried out justice. Morgan trusted her so much that he didn't feel the need to question her devious intentions. As Morgan walked along Princess Street, his self-assurance was at its peak. What a change a few hours made to his frame of mind. And for the first time in his life, he felt like a hard man, knowing his antics were all for a good cause. He felt so gallus that he wandered into the lobby of Edinburgh's most expensive hotel, the Balmoral. The same hotel that has a unique room that allows you to sleep where J.K. Rowling historically wrote the ending to her final Harry Potter book. As he confidently wandered into the lavish lobby, his head was held high as he admired the internal balcony stretching along most of the room. The white-painted finished balustrades and ceiling reminded Morgan of plantation mansions in the deep south of America, built from profits benefited by the slave trade. Morgan was also searching for security cameras so he could conveniently get himself noticed. A smile crossed his face as soon as he found a seat directly facing a camera. He casually walked past the reception desk without bringing any attention to himself before he comfortably sat down on the comfy leather seat. He sat and continued to admire the room. He then drew his attention back onto himself. He had somehow forgotten how to sit normally. It was mainly his hands, they just felt uncomfortable no matter what he did with them. In that moment of skepticism, Morgan finally noticed the red paint on the palm of his hands. A reminder that he had completed his end of the bargain. It was all Kira's idea. It was she who baited Morgan into spray painting Beast Ann Pedo on the outside of her family's £2 million ground floor property in Charlotte Square, in the affluent Edinburgh Old Town, a strategic move made by Kira. She told him how much it was worth, but the property she told Morgan to vandalize was worth more than $2 million. You can't really put a price on something that will most likely never be sold because the government owns it. Morgan hadn't realized that the property he defaced was none other than the official residence of Scotland's First Minister. It wouldn't be long until Morgan discovers this information for himself. In the meantime, Morgan's plan was to hold out for the rest of the night before finally returning home, where he hoped to see exactly how Kira had sealed her end of the deal. Then, he planned on waiting until it was safe to find Kira on social media. But first, Morgan needed to find a toilet before he was ironically caught red-handed. The elegant Megan Freeman exited the train toilet and immediately got off at her preferred stop. The drag queen was dressed and ready to impress. Her bright red hair was coiffed up high with the help of strong hairspray. She had white eyelash extensions that boldly sprawled out from her eyes at every possible angle, making them appear like icicles. Her dark red eyeliner stretched out towards her temples like the tail end of a Nike swoosh. The white lipstick tied in nicely with her eyelashes and white shoulder bag to round off her Queen of Narnia drag queen persona. The only thing that looked out of place was the white sneakers on her feet as she walked past the train station sign that stated Dunfermline. As she strolled past, she received some curious stares and comments from smokers outside the pubs. It wasn't long later before Megan arrived at her destination, a residential street in an ex-council estate. This house, in particular, was a 2-story terraced property. From the outside, it appeared as though whoever was home had already called it a night. Megan didn't hang about for long before she used her key to hesitantly open the front door. When she stepped into the front hall, the house seemed quiet. There wasn't a single light on as she slowly walked through into the living room, unknowingly leaving the front door wide open behind her. With the help of the outside street lamp, she could spot the half-drunk pint of lager on the coffee table that sat next to someone's vape device. She had a quick scan around the room at the family pictures of Morgan and his siblings. Then Megan noticed her reflection in the mirror above the mantelpiece. She gently swiped her coif back with her hand while she admired her appearance. Megan suddenly froze with fear when she heard the toilet flushing. It came from the downstairs toilet. A moment later, the sound of a squeaky door opening could be heard. It prompted Megan to run back towards the front door. As she entered the hallway, she stopped when she and Morgan's half-naked dad shared eye contact as he stepped out of the toilet underneath the staircase. They were both too shocked at first to even react. The father couldn't work out who it was right away due to the lack of light, but as soon as he recognized that same dishonorable drag queen, he made a run for her. Megan quickly retaliated, swooped out the front door, and headed for public ground. As soon as she reached the street pavement, she turned around to find the man falling face first onto the slabbed pathway of his front garden. The father had a hairy pot belly that, luckily enough, helped cushion his fall. He was only on the ground for a few seconds before the half-naked man sprung up again. As soon as Megan noticed the look of anger on the man's face, her legs untimely stiffened up. She was ready to surrender and accept her punishment when she suddenly remembered. She reached into her purse, pulled out a small can of pepper spray, and pointed it toward the approaching aggrieved father. She thought this maneuver might halt him in his tracks, but it made no difference. He only had one thing on his mind. With this in mind, she squeezed the nozzle with her finger, allowing the liquid to fly. As soon as Morgan's dad saw the pepper spray leave the can, he finally stopped short of Megan. He watched in dread as Megan dropped the can to wipe the mace from within her eyes. Megan whined in pain as she immediately became blind. She stepped back off the curb and onto the road without knowing her surroundings. The father had a look of terror on his face as he watched Megan's body unexpectedly fly through the air before it finally landed chest first on the tarmac road. The speeding car didn't even bother to slow down as it carried on with its journey. Morgan's father rushed over to Megan's motionless body. He flipped her body over and observed her bloody and bruised face. It wasn't until he removed the red wig that he discovered it wasn't his son Morgan but a 15-year-old lassie. He was completely unhinged as he stood up from the body, as if he now regretted even touching her in the first place. He took some steps back while his eyes remained glued to the still girl's body. Once he had backtracked to the curb, he stopped still, where he turned to look at his house and then around the hushed neighborhood. He found himself contemplating what his next move should be. All Kira had wanted to do was teach her parents a lesson, that lesson being that there was more to life than chasing Scottish independence. She always told herself that she would do anything for a good cause, including dressing up as a drag queen to teach a homophobic father how to treat everyone on Earth the same way he would like to be treated in return. A drunk family friend who had known Kira's father from his university days once told her that she reminded them of her dad when he was young, when her dad used to have a unique outlook on life. The family friend even shared a story with Kira from a time when her young father was studying law in Glasgow. Apparently, her dad got drunk one night, and for a laugh, he placed a traffic cone on the head of the Duke of Wellington statue, a statue that sat outside the city's most popular art gallery. When her father noticed someone had taken it down the following day, he felt obligated to put the cone back up. And that's exactly what he did. For the next few years, he would purposely go out of his way to make sure that cone sat on that statue's head until it eventually became a Glasgow tradition. And to this day, that orange traffic cone remains on the Duke's head for everyone to admire. But if life has taught us all anything, there's always a bigger picture needing to be told. In Kira's case, if the abusive fathers out there don't get to you first, then the drunk drivers will.